everybody, and welcome to the Exchange. I'm Tom Lenfestey, your host, and excited to be with you again on the Exchange, talking all things law firm marketplace. And super excited today to have what I believe is one of the smartest people in the field, who I've been impressed with over and over again through meeting him the first time, and then as I've gotten to know him through as far as his legal ops knowledge, his pulse on the market, and kind of what really makes law firms move and tick. So I'm happy to welcome Gabriel Stiritz. Gabriel, in his current role as CEO and founder of Lexamica. Lexamica is the first full cycle referral management platform for law firms. So Gabriel, thanks so much for being here. I greatly appreciate it.
It's great to talk with you as always. Really enjoy the opportunity.
Yeah, it was great to connect at National Trial Lawyers. I think that was a, exciting conference as always. And, it's always the side conversations that really are, it's great to sit in some sessions and hear what people are talking about, but I think it's connecting with the network that really makes stuff move. Would you agree?
Oh, percent. There's a term that I learned from VC recently that I thought was like, it crystallized everything that I've kind of intuitively known about the legal industry. It's a whisper network. And it just means that the only place you can learn about the industry is by being in person with the other people who know about the industry. It doesn't show up online. It's not in the public markets. And it perfectly encapsulates the only way to know the zeitgeist of personal injury and single event and plaintiff's law is to go to the conference and have a dozen conversations with the other people who are doing the exact same thing. So as someone who would be happy to talk for 12 hours straight, it's great for me. For the introverts out there, hopefully we can shed some light so you don't have to talk to people to learn what's going on.
So you got to see everybody as they were coming and going from that standpoint, and the conversations and just really feeling the pulse of what I would feel is kind of where law firm owners, especially on the plaintiff side, are moving is always exciting. And as part of, kicking off the year in that function with NTL is always a great thing. Gabriel,
100%.
you and I met, I think a few years ago now, really when you were in your previous role in a law firm. And I'd love to go back because I just think you have a very impressive story. I think it's part of what you've, built as far as your knowledge in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I appreciate that. And the journey has been interesting. The landscape has changed dramatically, but for the short version, for those of you who are new to my story, is I actually spent the first 10 years of my career working in nonprofit operations, technology, and that was really fascinating entree into building with very few resources. Took that and then moved into a role as the CFO for an employment law firm. We had a thesis that we would build a wage and hour practice, but we would take the principles that have been applied to motor vehicle accidents, personal injury, single event claims, and do volume for wage and hour employment law, which is great, right? Like there's a lot of reasons why you should do that are beyond just the economic ones, which is that so many people have been taken advantage of by their employers. Wage violations are one of the most common employment issues that people in America face, that many of them are small dollar, but for the people that have had their wages stolen from them, it's materially detrimental to their lives, and it can throw them into larger spirals of bankruptcy and housing issues. And so both because we thought, hey, there's an opportunity here to do something that hasn't been done before, and also that it's for the better of the American public, we decided to take a shot at and do that. And there had been a real degree of success in the law firm before I came, but it was largely unstructured. It was operating more as a partnership and less as a structured business. That was what I got hired in to build. We spent about 4 years working on that thesis, and we learned a lot along the way. One is that the number of employment violations across the country is absolutely massive. It's an untapped thing, and I will say this now, and I'll continue to say that if you think now that we're in the age of AI, this was back in 2019, there was no AI, like everything had to be automated by hand, which sounds like kind of like I'm really lazy, like I'm automating things by hand. Like, well, now you can automate things with automation, so it's even better. We did a lot of that, and in one way, it was largely successful. We fired hundreds of claims all over the country. They were good claims, but I think the real headwinds that we faced with that practice were around the judiciary, and the really what one of the major friction points was you're bringing a claim when there's maybe a few $1,000s of damages, which would be fine if you're in state court or you're settling out of court, but these are all federal claims, like by nature, when there aren't better wage protections. And so we just ran into a lot of headwinds with the federal judiciary, and a lot of the scalable processes break down when you're filing a federal claim every single time you have a new client. So that's, I mean, that's largely where you and I met, Tom, was when we were starting to look at, an exit for that, or, were we going to have to just pull, kind of dismantle it and move on to the next thing. We saw there's this back office piece of the industry. And when I say industry, I'm talking about not just injury, but mass torts, injury, anything on the plaintiff side of the bar, that we call referrals colloquially. And if you're in the industry, you know what that means, but really it's a small joint venture. It's one party originates the claim, a lawyer, and then another lawyer handles that claim, and then they share the fees when the case resolves. And, for a while, it was just a nuisance for me. When I arrived at the firm, we were getting faxed reports from People's Needles. And I was like, well, if this is 2019, I realized we're faxing things still. It seems a little crazy. Also, that could have been a spreadsheet, not just like a fax. So there's just a lot of, chaos still in the back office. And then I learned that this wasn't just a one-off thing. Like 20-30% of all claims are referred between attorneys, and they're still managing their networks on spreadsheets and Word documents and sticky notes. And the economics of those arrangements are done between emails, between the managing partners, and then the paralegals who are responsible for reconciling this at the end don't know where to find any of that. And then you're just tracking down large dockets of claims that have been largely forgotten. And so that was this small piece of what we were doing as part of the business model. And then as we got toward the end, it seemed like a really interesting problem to solve for the industry. And post COVID, we were in this interesting phase where lawyers were quickly moving to the cloud. And we had no idea that was going to be like a 2-year thing before AI came through and was like, hey, forget the cloud, like AI is coming. But for a little while there, if you hearken back to 2022, everyone moving to the cloud was a big deal, and it unlocked new opportunities to bring the industry together. And so we started working on this project to help law firms to manage their referrals better between their respective organizations. And so that was the genesis for Lexamica. Was, hey, we've got APIs, we can help law firms connect better and manage the flow of referrals between those firms and solve this back office function. And so, yeah, that all took from 2019 to early 2023 when I left the firm and founded this company.
What I think is amazing about that, Gabriel, is again, what you're brought in to do, right, on the law firm operations side and coming from a non-legal aspect. So I would imagine there was, a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences, right, for those law firm operations. I have a question for you, though. When you look back to when you came in to the operational role, so before, creating Lexamica, everything else, when you think about law firm operations back then, you kind of mentioned you were automating through really manual push, right? And you think about law firm operations today, right? Knowing you get to see a lot of best in class ops firms, right? And a lot of those law firm owners and managers and otherwise, and we get to see some of those as well. But how fast do you think really like the operational systems have changed for a lot of those firms, in the last 5 years? I mean, really meaning, you were saying manual automation. Now we're talking about, AI automation and how fast it can move. Are you seeing the speed of adoption, increase, or is it just that the technology can move faster? Are you seeing law firm owners that are more willing to, invest and kind of carry forward? And the impact it would have, because I think you see a lot of that like we do, and I think it's important for others to know what they can do in ops maybe now that they couldn't do 5 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, 5 years was so long ago. We were just getting out of COVID 5 years ago, and it's wild. And if you look back at that time, lawyers were skeptical of the transition from being on a server-based CRM or case management system and moving into the cloud for the first time. That was the big question. We were all still reeling that the judiciary would get on a Zoom call with us. And now SSD lawyers all practice all over the country because all the hearings are online. And so, I think the rate of change inside of law firms for the law firms that are adopting technology has increased dramatically. And the statistics around AI adoption by personal injury lawyers are astonishing when you look at how long the rate of change took for cloud adoption, e-discovery, everything else, like the prior major transformations. The rate of change has increased dramatically. And I feel that when I'm at conferences. I'm at 30 conferences a year. And even when I started, the interest level in the technology vendors at conferences was much lower. And now it was really hey, you're fortunate that I'm talking to you. It could sometimes be the kind of vibe that you would get. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But now it's really shifted, and lawyers are like, okay, who are you? How do you map into the landscape? How do I need to what am I missing if I'm not using this tool? And what are the other tools that are like this? Like, they are buyers, and they're not just buyers, they've become very sophisticated buyers of technology. So I think, to your audience, I'm sure most of you feel like that, but if not, you really are missing out to a large degree. I think buying has gotten more complicated because there are many tools coming to market. There's way more VC money in the space than there was 5 years ago. Just as a weird kind of proof point on that, Tom, about 5 years ago, you could get a booth at NTL for like $1,000, $1,500. They start at $6,000 now to get a booth. And there was a conference that I got priced out of personally, and the 30-minute demo session, from what I heard, was 30 grand just to do that. So that it does make buying decently hard when there's that many options on the market, but lawyers have become very sophisticated, and there are a lot more options now than there were even a few years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that buying has become more of a challenge. There's so many options now. The good news is there's also so many options that can have a significant impact. It's just choosing the right one, the right fit, right, for your practice and kind of going through that.
And just one thing to say too is, like, I've also talked to law firms that have overbought, and
Hmm.
they've bought everything. And look, maybe they're making good buying decisions. Like, these are the right tools, but you can't swallow the ocean, and you have to do it one piece at a time. And so, I would say, even if you do have FOMO, or you're like, hey, I'm behind the eight ball on this, like, you should not go and immediately purchase 10 tools and then hope that your team can adopt them all. You will waste a boatload of money, and you won't get the advantages of doing a staged implementation approach.
Do you think AI, like, now what we're seeing a lot of is firms building their own AI agents, right? So they have their own developers that are working on, building these. Do you think that's similar? Like a lot of times it's not stopping to look at the total framework. It's just, hey, here's something over here. Let's build.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It's the rate, again, like, the rate of change internal to law firms, external in the market, has never been higher than it is right now. And I think that lawyers are in a particularly tough position because, on the one hand, if you adopt at the bleeding edge, like, you're almost guaranteed to have some slip ups. Like, there are the very infamous AI filing made up case citations 18, 24 months ago, even more recently than that. And so it's like, if you're on the bleeding edge, you're bound to make some mistakes. But then if you're not on the bleeding edge, because the tools are so powerful, you're immediately starting to fall behind on some level with your competitors. I do think, though, that the hype cycle is somewhat overstated at the end of the day, and especially in personal injury. You may hate me for saying this, like, it's not a particularly complex industry. Like, there are things that have a much, much higher degree of complexity if you look at workflows and how everything works. And there are core processes, and I would say this to anyone: before you go buy technology, before you get caught up in the FOMO or the hype cycle, you got to look at your law firm and say, where are the places that, and when you rank sort it and you say, if I have to pick one thing per quarter to improve, where am I going to get the max improvements? What's that going to do to my top line and to my bottom line? And then how do I go and make that change? And you have to take a very disciplined approach, because everyone's running at you with $200 million of newly minted VC money burning a hole in their sales team's pockets, and they're trying to get in your door. And you have to become a sophisticated buyer, because the tools are good. The rate of change is really good. But if you go out and you make a knee-jerk buying decision or build decision and you don't understand your business priorities, just, Gary, you're going to end up spinning your wheels.
So that's really interesting to me because there's a question leading into this podcast I wanted to get your thoughts on. It's really impact on value. And so when we go back again, I'm going to take you back to your inside the law firm ops days, anything else. When we look at value in a simple explanation, I'm always looking at the financials, I'm looking at the brand, and I'm looking at the systems, right? As you go back to looking at operations when you were within the law firm and, right, looking at the impact that you really saw of what you could do to impact value, right?
Yeah. So when I look at firm operations, there's five things that I think you can, or pillars that you can break it down into. And I think one of my core thesis is largely that, like, the issue with personal injury law firms with profitability and margins, like, it's not about how big your brand is necessarily, or just like how many people in your law firm, or even top line revenue. There's a lot of regulatory capture already, because only lawyers can own law firms. And because of that, I think that the main deficiencies are operational, and that lawyers have gotten really good at litigating cases writ large, and really good at at their marketing writ large, even though it is competitive and they'll complain, everyone on this podcast, I understand it's really hard and it's getting hard every day. You have it great. Don't worry. You're not an airline. There's zero margins in that business. But there are 5 pillars that I would say, look at these. And I think if you're thinking, how do I maximize the value of my firm? You're probably going to need to improve one of these areas. One, and you already mentioned it, Tom, it's your client acquisition / brand. Like, what is your top of funnel strategy? How much do you control your ability to bring clients in? Brand is still really powerful. Having brand saturation over time, that takes time and a lot of money to build. I think there's a lot of value in that. If you're doing unbranded lead gen, that's a much more difficult, there you have less equity than if you have a brand that owns a market. Second one is your intake conversion. That's a highly tactical, highly operational. Your intake conversion has to be amazing. If you're not closing 92% of clients on your first call when they're qualified, you are just leaving money on the table. 3 is your operations on case management and litigation. That is lawyers and paralegals and case managers who can make the trains run on time and they can get the value out of the claims. If you don't have the checklist, if you don't have operators in those roles, you're just throwing money down their drain. You're not running the cases correctly. The fourth one is the medical management, which I think can be largely overlooked, but it's because it's slightly external to the firm. And I think a lot of lawyers have varying ethical opinions on how much can we get involved in this? How much is it something that we have to take a really hands-off approach versus a more proactive hands-on approach? I know lawyers who are managing to the KPI for percentage of MRIs done on their claims. Like, some people are comfortable with that. Other people would say, I can't touch this with a 10-foot pole because that would be unethical. I am just pointing to what's creating equity and in value multiples for your law firm. You can figure out the ethics for yourself. And then the fifth piece is, what are you doing with the cases that you aren't handling in-house? And this is the referral piece, which is where Lexamica can come in more directly. The best law firms, if they're not handling a claim, that's going for at least one more look outside of their law firm, preferably 2 or 3 looks for any claim that's outside of their jurisdiction, outside of their criteria, outside their practice area. It's the best money you're ever going to make because you have no OPEX associated with it. It's basically free money because you've already spent your marketing dollars. It's just exhaust, light it on fire, get another house, another boat, get another couple X on your EBITDA multiples. But those are the 5 things that if you have those all nailed down, you're absolutely going to crush it. But I think most lawyers, they're missing 2 or 3 of those and they're not optimized. And I would say, listen, if you're a buyer of law firms, Tom, so your audience as well, you should be looking at law firms that you can acquire and immediately improve 2 or 3 of those things, get a discount on the initial price because lawyers don't have the time or inclination to fix those. And if you're a lawyer and you want to enhance your negotiating position, have all 5 of those absolutely optimized, and you either command amazing multiples or you're going to do a 40% profit margin and you may or may not want to sell. And I know, Tom, you still want to sell it. Don't worry. You want to sell it. But also, it's going to not hurt when you're not selling it yet.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I love it, Gabriel, because what you just really detailed is the buyer analysis, right? Where we can talk about valuation, but what buyers want to know is, hey, what are you doing on that brand, the marketing by type? How is that working? How is your intake working, right? And go through to the ops and everything else. And, again, you pointed out if you're weak on one of those or 2 of those or 3, which you probably are, or you don't have the data behind it, or otherwise, that's where you're going to have a hard time with a buyer getting them convinced. I think the overarching is it's capturing value that's already in your firm, like Lexamica is, and these others, like capturing value already there. And it's pure like value integration. It's also just organizing part of your ops better that was weak, like you said, when you were in the firm, getting faxes, manual push, otherwise, to really lay one of those things and say, we're strong there. Right. And to, a buy side later, or to your just pocket right now.
Tom, just to call out that you said that I missed, I think is really important. Is be crushing on all of those. But if you don't have the data saved to back that up, you're never going to get the multiples you want. And buyers are not going to be able to look at you well. So if you're interested in selling, you have to have that written and documented, both the outcomes themselves and also those processes and procedures that are to make sure that those are replicable. Because like you said, you have to write it down. It has to be all documented, both the metrics and also the processes.
I'm going to go a little bit deeper, a little bit theoretical, but I think, you and I have had enough conversations. We can probably do this. What do you really feel is the greatest opportunity for law firm owners in this market right now today? That could be operational, it could be other. And then I'm going to ask you, of course, what do you see as kind of that key threat if you're not paying attention, right? That's coming your way.
Yeah, I think that we are at a place right now where there's two opportunities that really stand out to me. One of them is pretty classic. I think that branding is still important. I think that it's something, there's a lot of opportunity left here. But I think that consumer focused branding, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of really great brands out there that are focused around the lawyers and the lawyers who built the law firms. And I think that's really powerful. There's clearly a lot of equity value there. But I was just on a call with someone, and we were talking about how there really aren't brands that are based around the consumer focus. What is the consumer, like many of the great brands out there, they're really built around like what do consumers need and how do consumers want to consume the services, the goods, the products that are being offered. And that's just not something that really exists in the legal space right now. And I think you do have to start that somewhat carte blanche. You can't necessarily pivot a Johnson and Murphy partnership into a consumer-facing brand. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity there. Consumer behavior continues to shift. Lawyers are doing great with the brands that we have, but we don't have a lot of consumer-facing, consumer-oriented brands. So that's an opportunity. I mean, I think the other one is that there is still a serious lack of really strong operational operator talent in the legal industry. Lawyers have done a great job of professionalizing over the past 20 years, but I still think that if I look at, there's marketing, there's litigation capabilities, there's advertising, even on like the intake side, those, I'd say intake is often weaker. But a law firm, if you want to improve your firm and you want to make it more valuable, go out and find really sophisticated operators who've worked in, let's say, consumer electronics or in retail or in manufacturing, and hire from outside of legal, bring them in and have that person running your firm as the COO of your firm. And just because you're mid-market or you're in a smaller market, you should still be figuring out, like, it just takes one great hire who has that instinct and that capability to really set you apart from a lot of other firms. And especially if you're considering either an exit strategy generationally or an exit to a buyer, like that's the person to bring in. Yeah, I mean, there was a large educational piece, and certainly you want someone who's not going to come in and mesh poorly with your culture, with your law firm, and but you also have to give that person room to operate in new and different ways than you're maybe comfortable with or familiar with. The change management is a huge piece of that. But I mean, Tom, the reality is, and you know this better than anyone in the industry, change is coming. Everyone has felt the change with AI, but we are at a position where there is nothing standing between the legal industry and being one of the last waves of the MSO private equity roll up. And, for better or worse, like that is on track to happen. Your decision now, if you're a mid to small size lawyer, is to figure out what you are going to do with that and what you're going to do about that. And I was looking at the statistics yesterday. Like, it doesn't mean that 50% of all the lawyers are going to get bought out by PE, but even in the industries where we've like heard a lot of talk, dental, veterinarian, whatever, even a 5 to 15% aggregation at the top end of the market, it feels huge to everyone involved. And what I would say is, you could look around you and say, look, even if 85%, 70% of the industry doesn't get touched by private equity, everyone is going to feel dramatically different when you have a 15% market concentration in a few big players at the top of the market who are all spending more money, operating more efficiently, and changing the dynamic in almost every major market across the country. I just think it's helpful to frame that out. It's like, A, this is coming. B, it doesn't have to happen that much to make everyone feel differently. Like, think about ABSs. ABSs was one state. There's not actually that many. There's only like 120 of them. And yet in many markets, people are feeling pressure from the ABS law firms that are there. PE is going to put more pressure on. You got to figure out how to deal with that and not just stick your head under a rock and say, well, I wish that things would remain the way that they are.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I've talked about, you could look at it as a competitor, you can look at it at other things, right? Whether you're going to exit, partner with PE, if that's even a factor, or it's just, hey, somebody else, right? Like you brought up, as far as Mike Morse, you brought up, it's kind of like, with Morgan, like they're doing it different. And when they're doing it different, it puts a little pressure on everybody else to say, uh-oh, do we need to do it different? Right. And if so, is, how do we invest in our firm? How do we get up to speed on this and kind of carry that forward? And I think, that's a good thing, right? It can be a good thing. It can be, detrimental if you can't innovate, you can't change, but it is coming. It's already here, as you know, through certain transactions and kind of will pick up steam in 26 and beyond. I think one of the things that's really interesting to me, Gabriel, and you and I have talked a lot about the concept of value within a firm, but is when you get, private capital into now where they're saying, here is what we value this law firm at. Right. You and I know this because we've had these conversations for years. But 5 years ago, we had law firms saying, I don't know, I don't know if there's value. And I think it really has put everybody in this concept of, yes, you have a business. It is a law firm, but you have a business that somebody on the outside over here values, right, significantly. And you should really do everything you can to promote that value. And that's where I actually think it's an okay thing, because to your point, it's not like 100% are going to change over and be owned by private equity. It's really that impact, but it also shifts around to say, hey, do some things, focus on ops, right? Focus on those aspects that we went through on the valuation discussion to really be prideful of the business that you're building. And when you have revenue walking out the door, that's referral revenue or whatnot, why wouldn't you fix that? Right? Yeah, you're making good money, but it's building a better business that is going to hopefully benefit you today in income, but also tomorrow, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of positive impacts to it.
100%. And look, whether you're going to sell, hold, or transition it over to the next generation, you have a safer, better long-term outlook by doing the things we're talking about. It's literally a no-lose situation. The only reason you would stay at the status quo today is if you just want to be comfortable and ride this thing over the next few years, and then you're going to wind it down. Otherwise, you have to be thinking about this stuff. The market's always evolving. And the thing that I always look at as a business owner is like, I want maximum optionality into the future. I don't know what good or bad things are going to come my way. The only thing that I can do is prepare to be able to take advantage of or protect from those in the future. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about. Like, look, if you haven't talked to someone like Tom to understand what buyers are asking about and thinking about and how they're looking at this, do it. The only thing you can do is learn what your competitor down the street is going to do. You're going to figure out what constraints or what optionality they'll have when they have a capital partner. Maybe you'll learn you want to do that, but maybe you'll decide you don't want to. But I do think this is something that like no one in the industry can afford to ignore at this point when you're at a certain scale. If you're a solo, I'm not talking to you, but when you get to a certain size, you really have to engage with this to understand your business as a business. I mean, it's so fascinating to me, Tom, how, just looking at this vertical, so many of the owners of law firms, because of when advertising was deregulated, when law firms got founded, we're approaching a generational change anyway. Everyone needs an exit strategy. And because you're going to retire or die, and someone needs to pick up the reins on your law firm. And so really what we're talking about isn't just buy or sell, but thinking about like, what does the future of your, and what's your legacy? Like, what do you want to leave behind when you're not running this law firm anymore?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is, again, it's having a plan for when you're ready to exit or you're required to exit. It doesn't mean, knowing the value of your firm, planning for who is going to be your buyer, what, kind of path you want to take needs to happen today, but you should know, right? I always think there's strategic value in that, knowing that you've preserved your legacy and that brand and everything you've invested in your firm because you do have a defined exit path, right? You have a plan that's ready to be executed. This has been great, Gabriel. I mean, you and I could just continue to talk and kind of go through things. I'll ask you a question of like, what do you think in the marketplace, our marketplace, because that's where you and I like to talk a lot about what's going on in consolidations for 2026. Like, what do you think is going to happen, whether it's number of transactions? I shared this with the group I was talking to earlier this week. Last year, we did two MSOs out of about 15 total transactions for our team, right? So two MSO transactions. This year, we have three under contract right now, and all three are MSOs.
Yeah.
Private equity, private capital blend, right? Some of those have lawyers in the mix, right? Everything else, but they are MSO structures being the preferred. So it's really, for us, we're seeing a shift of the mid-sized to larger firms, especially on the plaintiff side. And I'm always intrigued to get your thoughts of what you see, because again, you're having a lot of those conversations. just as I am.
I think MSOs are absolutely being landed on as the preferred vehicle for these transactions. That's almost exclusively what I'm hearing. So I think one, that for sure. The buy side, the sell side, everyone is coalescing around a vehicle that is workable for this transaction. I think that means that more deals are going to get done faster now that that's becoming somewhat of a standard. And better than I do, but I think we're going to hear some really big announcements in Q1, Q2 about some of the marquee players in this space and what that's going to mean for the next year. And then I think because of that, there's been plenty of people who are waiting on the sidelines, seeing what initial multiples look like. They're going to hear through the grapevine what to start to expect around that. And I think that we'll start to see a decent amount of volume toward the back half of the year. Last year, I think a lot of things got set up. I think there's a lot of talk about how do these transactions happen. If we looked at our conversation from 12 months ago, Tom, I think we were having a conversation about ABS versus MSO versus some type of lawyer buyout. That's not happening as much anymore. I think that means the deals are getting more structured and more real and later stage. So I think that, it'll be really curious to hear from us a year from now what the conversation looks like. It certainly isn't going to slow down. I do think this is the year we start to see the rubber meet the road and a lot more people start to announce the deals that they've closed.
I fully agree, and hopefully you and I will have some fun discussing that. We will have to make this at least an annual reoccurrence of kind of an update and where we go from there. Gabriel, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate the time. For those that are looking to shore up that fifth variable of value, right? Those referrals that they're sending out, not tracking everything else. How would they explore and get started with Lexamica?
You visit our website, lexamica.com, or shoot me an email, gabriel@lexamica.com. Listen, if I said something that you disagree with or that's wrong, I would love to hear from you on that. There's nothing I like better than feedback. You're welcome to send me an email or book a demo, learn about what we're doing. Like I mentioned, we do about 200,000 referrals a year, 800 law firms active on our platform. It's the biggest managed referral network that's ever been built, and we're really just getting started. Would love to have you on board.
And again, just for all the reminders, if you want motivation to really explore this, it is really something that can be pure profit to your platform, right? And there's so many that we've run across that have said, yes, we send referrals out. I don't know if I get a lot of referral fees back. Change that, right? So look at, this market leading platform, Lexamica, led by one of the brightest in the industry, Gabriel Stiritz. Gabriel, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate the time, sir.
Thanks for having me, Tom.